The woman with the tin box. Somewhere in rural Appalachia, an 89-year-old woman keeps a tin box under her bed. Inside it, small paper envelopes, hand-labeled in faded pencil. Squash. Tomato, 1987. Some of those seeds are older than her children. And every spring, without fail, they grow. She has never once purchased a seed packet. The technique she uses, passed down through 4 generations, is called seed saving. It is one of the oldest practices in human history and one of the most quietly endangered. Understanding how it works, why it worked so well, and why so few people still practice it reveals something important about how we grow food, who controls it, and what we stand to lose if we stop paying attention. The world before seed companies existed. For roughly 12,000 years, every farmer on Earth was also a seed keeper. It wasn't a hobby or a philosophy. It was survival. You didn't eat next year if you didn't save this year. And so people paid attention, obsessively. They noticed which tomato plant held its fruit longest before rotting, which bean climbed higher in a drought year, which squash seeds, dried on wooden boards rather than metal, germinated faster in cold soil. This knowledge wasn't written in textbooks. It was shared across fence lines, tucked into letters crossing oceans, traded at church suppers and county fairs. An entire civilization's worth of agricultural intelligence, encoded not in data, but in the seeds themselves. Over the 20th century, this practice declined sharply, not all at once, but through a combination of economic pressures, changing farming practices, and the development of new seed technologies that made purchased inputs more convenient than saved ones. The result is that today, most households in the developed world have limited practical knowledge of how to grow food from saved seed across multiple seasons. How that shift happened is worth understanding clearly, because the story is more complicated than either the seed industry or its harshest critics tend to acknowledge. The development of seed intellectual property. In 1970, the United States passed the Plant Variety Protection Act. The legislation created a framework for protecting the intellectual property of plant breeders, people who invested significant resources in developing new crop varieties. This was, in principle, similar to other intellectual property protections. It gave breeders a limited period of exclusivity in exchange for disclosure and eventual public access. The act actually included an explicit exemption allowing farmers to save seeds from protected varieties for replanting on their own farms. In the decades that followed, intellectual property protections for plant varieties expanded in scope and complexity. The 1980 Supreme Court ruling in Diamond v. Chakraborty opened the door to patenting of living organisms and utility patents, which carry stronger restrictions than plant variety protection certificates, began to be applied to crop varieties, particularly those developed through genetic engineering. Unlike PVP certificates, utility patents can and often do restrict farmer seed saving. International frameworks, including the International Union for the Protection of New Varieties of Plants, UPOV, established similar protections in other countries. The restrictions vary significantly by country and by the type of protection applied. In many jurisdictions, farmers retain the right to save seeds from open-pollinated varieties. The legal landscape is genuinely complex, and characterizations of seed saving as simply illegal in any broad sense are inaccurate. What is restricted in most cases is the replanting of patented hybrid or genetically modified varieties whose development required substantial commercial investment. The commercial seed industry has consolidated significantly over the past several decades. By the early 2020s, a handful of large companies, including Bayer, which acquired Monsanto, Corteva, Syngenta, and BASF, controlled a substantial share of the commercial seed market. This consolidation raises legitimate questions about market competition, pricing, and the direction of agricultural research. These are worth examining seriously on their actual merits. The seed industry's most profitable product, and its legitimate rationale. Here is something worth understanding clearly. Modern commercial agriculture relies heavily on F1 hybrid seeds. These are produced by crossing 2 distinct parent lines, and they reliably produce offspring with specific, predictable traits, uniformity, disease resistance, high yields. Farmers who purchase them know what they're getting, which matters enormously at scale. The biological fact about F1 hybrids is that they do not breed true. If you save seeds from an F1 tomato and plant them the following year, the resulting plants will be genetically variable. Some may be vigorous, many will not resemble the parent. This isn't a secret, and it isn't unique to commercially developed varieties. It's a well-understood consequence of how hybrid genetics work. For commercial farmers, this means purchasing new seed each season. That's a real cost, and it creates a real dependency on seed suppliers. Critics of industrial agriculture are right to note that this dependency is built into the business model. But it's also worth being precise. F1 hybrids are not engineered to fail. They produce vigorous, productive first-generation plants. That's the point of the hybrid. The limitation is in subsequent generations. And the motivation for developing them wasn't purely to manufacture dependency. Hybrid breeding also produces genuine agronomic benefits that open-pollinated varieties often can't match in commercial settings. What the homesteaders used was something different: open-pollinated varieties, which do breed true. Saved correctly, these seeds maintain their characteristics and can actually improve over generations in a specific environment. This is not a secret the industry has suppressed. Open-pollinated and heirloom seeds are widely available, and the seed-saving movement has worked steadily to make them more accessible. The forgotten method that still works. The technique at the heart of traditional seed saving is called mass selection with isolation. It is both simpler and more demanding of attention than anything you'd find in a commercial seed catalog. Here is how it worked on a 19th-century homestead. A farmer growing pole beans didn't save seeds from just any plant. At harvest time, she walked her rows with a specific kind of attention, not looking for the biggest beans, not the prettiest. She was looking for the last one standing. The plants still upright when others had yellowed. The pods that held firm through the first frost. The ones that seemed, almost willfully, to refuse to quit. From those plants, sometimes only 5 or 6 out of hundreds, she saved her seed. Every single year. Not randomly. Deliberately. Over a decade, something happened that no single growing season could produce. The seeds didn't just maintain their quality. They adapted. They developed what agricultural scientists now call local adaptation, a genetic fit to the specific conditions of that hillside, that soil chemistry, that microclimate, those precise seasonal pressures. A bean line saved on a Tennessee ridge for 30 years could outperform commercially bred varieties in that exact location, because it had been selected, season by season, for precisely those conditions. Modern agricultural science calls this landdress development, and researchers who have studied it acknowledge that some homestead-developed varieties show impressive genetic resilience, in part because they carry adaptations that laboratory breeding programs, optimizing for broad performance across many environments, don't prioritize. The method has a few specific requirements. Seeds must be isolated from other varieties to prevent unwanted cross-pollination. Different crops have different isolation distance requirements. Seeds should be stored in paper, not plastic, because paper breathes and prevents the condensation that silently destroys viability. And selection must be consistent and intentional, saving from the best plants, not the most convenient ones. None of this requires specialized equipment. It requires observation, patience, and the willingness to learn from what your garden is telling you. The quiet extinction that actually happened. In 2004, anthropologist Virginia Nazaria published research on what she called memory banking, the cultural transmission of not just seeds, but the embodied knowledge required to tend them across generations. The findings were sobering. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization has estimated that roughly 75% of agricultural plant diversity was lost over the 20th century. This isn't disputed. The cause was primarily the large-scale adoption of a smaller number of higher-yielding commercial varieties, which displaced thousands of locally adapted landdresses that had been cultivated for centuries. Varieties developed over generations vanished. Drought-resistant strains from the Peruvian highlands. Cold-hardy squashes developed by indigenous communities across the Great Plains. Tomato varieties in southern Italy so old they appeared in Renaissance paintings. The loss is real and it matters. Seeds, unlike books or buildings, cannot easily be reconstructed. A variety that isn't grown eventually becomes non-viable. The specific genetic adaptations those lost varieties carried, drought tolerance developed across centuries in particular soils, disease resistance refined across generations, cannot be re-engineered from scratch. They can only be rediscovered, if samples still exist somewhere, or mourned. It's worth being honest about one complication: not every lost variety represented an irreplaceable genetic resource. Some were simply superseded by genuinely better alternatives. The loss of diversity is a serious problem, but the picture isn't entirely one of tragedy. Some of what replaced older varieties was a genuine improvement for the farmers who adopted it. What is unambiguously lost, and harder to recover, is the distributed knowledge of how to work with diverse varieties in specific environments. That knowledge lived in people, and it is genuinely disappearing. The Doomsday Vault and what it actually means. In 2008, the Svalbard Global Seed Vault opened inside a mountain in the Norwegian Arctic. Carved into permafrost, designed to maintain sub-zero temperatures with minimal energy input, built to withstand a range of extreme scenarios, it now holds over 1.3 million seed varieties from countries around the world. It is a genuine achievement of international cooperation and scientific foresight. But its architects have been candid about its limitations. A seed in a vault doesn't adapt. It doesn't evolve in response to changing climate conditions, new diseases, or shifting soil chemistry. A seed only develops resilience through use, through generation after generation of selection by farmers who are paying attention. The vault preserves genetic material at a moment in time. It cannot replace the ongoing process of adaptation that happens when seeds are grown, selected, and saved year after year in living systems. It is an insurance policy, a valuable one, not a substitute for active, distributed seed saving in communities around the world. The scientists who built it understood this. The vault was designed as a complement to active seed saving practice, not a replacement for it. Why this knowledge is disappearing right now. What the woman in Appalachia does every autumn is not a heritage hobby or a lifestyle choice. It is, by any serious biological measure, meaningful conservation work. When she selects her seeds, she is practicing applied genetics that predates Mendel by 10,000 years. When she stores them in paper rather than plastic, she is following preservation principles that laboratory researchers independently confirmed after homesteaders had already proven them empirically. When she trades seeds with a neighbor 2 counties over, she is performing what geneticists call gene flow maintenance, the introduction of just enough genetic variation to prevent the inbreeding depression that makes isolated seed lines fragile over time. None of this was taught to her in a classroom. She learned it from her mother, who learned it from hers. And here is the part worth sitting with. That knowledge, the specific timing of selection, the isolation distances required to prevent unwanted cross-pollination, the indicators that distinguish a genuinely vigorous plant from one that merely looks healthy, exists now almost exclusively in the memories of people over 70. When they go, without deliberate intervention, it goes with them. Not into history books. Not into archives. Into silence. This is not a hypothetical threat. It is an ongoing process, measurable in the gap between what seed-saving practitioners know and what is documented anywhere they could be found. The network that is saving what remains. But knowledge doesn't disappear without resistance. And the people who recognize what's being lost have been working, quietly and persistently, to document and distribute it. Seed libraries now operate inside public library systems in hundreds of American cities. You check out seeds the same way you check out books, and return seeds from your harvest at the end of the season, renewing the collection with locally adapted genetics. The Seed Savers Exchange in Decorah, Iowa, has spent decades tracking down elderly farmers across the Midwest, recording their methods, and multiplying their varieties for redistribution. Native Seeds Search has preserved over 2,000 crop varieties from the arid Southwest, many of them recovered from indigenous communities who continued saving seeds even when the broader culture had largely stopped. Some of those Appalachian bean varieties, ones that came within a generation of disappearing entirely, are now growing in urban gardens in Brooklyn and hillside plots in Portugal. The methodology these organizations teach is the same one the homesteaders used. Mass selection, isolation, paper envelopes, patient observation. The willingness to walk your rows slowly and ask not which plant looks biggest, but which plant is still standing. What anyone can learn. The learning curve for basic seed saving is genuinely shallow. A first-year gardener with a single tomato plant can begin a seed line today that, managed correctly, will still be viable 30 years from now. That seed will carry the genetic imprint of their specific garden, their soil, their climate, their particular pressures. Not as metaphor, as measurable biology. What the old homesteaders understood is that seeds are not merely inputs. They are not commodities to be purchased at the beginning of a season and discarded at the end. They are relationships, living agreements between a farmer and a piece of land, renewed each season, refined each year, becoming more specific and more resilient with every generation of careful selection. Modern agriculture didn't make that relationship unnecessary. It made it easy to forget. The supply chains and corporate research departments and global logistics networks absorbed a function that, for 12,000 years, was distributed across millions of individual farmers. That arrangement has produced genuine abundance. It has also created genuine fragility, a concentration of genetic resources and agricultural knowledge in fewer hands, fewer places, and fewer living memories than at any point in human history. The last seed keepers. Here is what the woman with the tin box understands. A seed is not a product. It carries inside it every year of drought survived, every frost endured, every adaptation accumulated across generations of farmers who were paying close enough attention to notice which plants were still standing. When you save a seed, you are not just preserving a plant variety. You are extending a chain of knowledge that stretches back 12,000 years, back to the first person who ever looked at a struggling crop and thought, "Save the best. Try again next year." The practice the homesteaders used was never really a trick. It was a discipline, a refusal, quiet, unspectacular, consequential, to let the most fundamental act of agriculture become something only specialists and corporations were expected to understand. That tin box under the bed in Appalachia isn't a relic of a simpler time. It's a working model of something resilient, and the knowledge inside it belongs to anyone willing to walk their rows slowly enough to notice which plants are still standing, and patient enough to kneel down and save what survives. For those interested in learning more, the Seed Savers Exchange, seedsavers.org, Native Seeds Search, nativeseeds.org, and the Open Source Seed Initiative, osseeds.org, all provide resources on seed saving, open-pollinated varieties, and the broader effort to maintain agricultural biodiversity.